Hello. Welcome to the lectures on the Human Factors Analysis and Classification System. This is going to be a series of 3 lectures. The first one on the unsafe acts that operators would commit. The second lecture will be on the preconditions that set up those failures. And the third and final lecture will be a shorter version, a shorter lecture, which will include the supervisory failures and organizational failures. And what I'm going to do is lay these out. It's about 3 hours or so. And this first one we're going to get started right now. So, without further ado, keep in mind that the Human Factors Analysis and Classification System, or what we'll refer to as HFACS, 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 the foundation really came from a book that Jim Reason wrote several years ago actually it was published in 1990, where he took some ideas from people like Heinrich and others that had proposed this idea that, accidents causation is a cascade of events. Essentially, if you will, what Jim was saying is that when we look at accidents, we tend to focus only on the unsafe acts of operators, things that people do wrong. And in doing so, we kind of miss the bigger picture. And for instance, I like to give the example all the time of the car accidents that I've had in my past. And as you'll find out throughout the course, that I kind of draw my own experiences and the accidents that I've had and the errors that I've committed. And one classic was about, 7 years ago now, in the right around the 2004 time frame, I had my second car accident in my life. My first one was when I was a teenager and was a little overzealous, if you will. But the second one actually occurred on a November evening, nothing really going on. It was about 7 o'clock at night. I was exiting our subdivision. And I've done this hundreds of times. In fact, if you look at the subdivision and you go in and you realize there's probably, about 50 homes in there. And let's just assume, the subdivision had been in existence for about 10 years. And you've got 50 homes and people are going in and out of there hundreds of times throughout the day. There had never been an accident prior to mine at that intersection. And there hasn't been one since, to the best of my knowledge. And now I don't live there anymore, but I haven't heard of any. And here's what essentially happened. It was pretty straightforward. Basically what happened was this. The way it's set up is that if you can imagine having an exit coming to a stop sign. I have a stop sign, and then there's another road that goes north-south, actually, that I tee into. And this road that goes north-south has, I want to say, around a 50, 55 mile an hour speed limit, and there is no stop sign for them. It's a stop sign only for me. You look left, you look right, you look left, whatever. And then in this particular case, I was going to be driving south, so I was turning left, so I had to cross traffic, go into the left lane, and go about my way. And I've done this hundreds of times, because that's the same way I would go to work every day. But this one night was a little different, because this time I thought I looked both directions, but apparently I didn't, because when I pulled right out in front of a young lady driving her daddy's car, and she hit me right in the driver's side door. Kaboom. It was an ugly night. It was massive damage to both cars, airbag deploys. Nobody gets hurt, which is the blessing of this whole story, but the truth is that I had pulled out into oncoming traffic. And what was interesting is the police officer, the state trooper, came out to do the investigation. He was out there for about an hour, comes back to me about an hour later, and we're sitting there, myself and the young lady, and we've been chatting, exchanging information, things like that. And then almost apologetically, the police officer comes up to me and says, "Sir, I'm going to have to issue you a citation, a ticket, because I've determined after my investigation that the cause of this accident," are you ready for this? The cause of the accident was driver, me, failed to yield to oncoming traffic, the young lady. Well, duh, yeah. I pulled out in front of her. I clearly admitted that. I had made a mistake. Now, there were no other cause factors. This was the culmination of this hour-long investigation, of which he took a statement from myself and from the young lady. Now, the problem with that is, how do you fix that? How do you fix that problem? Because I'm probably not the only one in that year that pulled out into, failed to yield to oncoming traffic. If you look at the Oklahoma City metro area that year, you'll probably find out that hundreds, maybe thousands of people had done the same thing, some of which may have resulted in fatalities. And if your job is to prevent that from happening again, what do? Well, the typical individuals that I pose that question to, they'll give you all these ideas. Well, let's put a stoplight up. Oh, wonderful, that's a great idea, except that if you put a stoplight at that one, I mean, there's never been an accident there before. There hasn't been one since, to the best of my knowledge. There are other 3 subdivisions along that 1 mile stretch that don't have stoplights either. Would you put one at each of those intersections? I mean, after all, it would presumably solve the problem, but is it warranted? Is the cost benefit? Well, you say, well, it might have prevented death. Yes, but at what cost? I mean, and I'm not trying to put cost on severity, but the truth of the matter is I'm not sure that would have solved anything. But then again, let's look at it even bigger. Some people say, well, let's send him back to training. Obviously, he's forgotten how to drive, so let's send him back to driver's ed. So you're going to put me in a room with a bunch of teenagers learning how to drive because I've had a car accident? Well, that doesn't make sense either. Well, let's suspend his license. That's what we'll do. We'll take away his license because if the penalty was levied and large enough, people would never do it. Well, that assumes I was motivated to do it in the first place. That it wasn't an accident. That I was, in fact, trying to get out in front or something. Maybe I saw her coming, I thought I could make it. That might solve that, but simply punishing me for an accident, an honest mistake, you'll find out later that that doesn't solve anything. In fact, what Jim Reason would say in his book, and others, Heinrich and others, said you have to look higher in the system. We have to look at the preconditions for those unsafe acts. What was different about me that night than any other night I'd been driving? And if you ask the right questions, you'd find out that a lot was different. In fact, if you ask the right question, you find out that I just had an argument with my wife. Yeah. Now, if you've been married, we've all had arguments. We like to refer to them as loud discussions in our family. I mean, the truth of the matter is we all argue because that's healthy and that's what we do as married couples. You argue and you make up and life is good. That's why we're married. Because if you're not arguing, you're not married, you're simply living together. And that's, well, the point here is that we all argue. That's part of socialization. And we were arguing over who was going to take my 10-year-old daughter to her choir recital. Yeah. It was a Thursday night. I just come off a trip. There's a football game on. I don't want to go to no... I mean, if you like listening to people whip cats, you love 10-year-old choir recitals. I don't like that. I'm kind of normal when it comes to that. But we all do. You got it. You take your daughter and you listen to them, and it's like, ah! And then she comes up and you say, oh, you were the best-sounding cat daughter. You sounded great. It's part of what we do as adults, as parents. We have to say things to make everybody... And that's what we do. It's important. And I understand that. And like many of the arguments I've had over the last 20 years with my wife, more often than not, I don't win. And, you think I would learn. But the truth is, in this case, I shouldn't have won. Because the truth is that I did need to spend more time with my family. And she did make sense. But that didn't make it any better or more palatable to me. As a result, I'm angry. I'm frustrated. But I put my daughter in my wife's SUV, and we're driving down the road, and I'm mad, and I'm saying things I shouldn't be saying. And all of a sudden, I'm not paying attention. I don't look both ways, and it's that quick. Thank goodness nobody got hurt. It could have been a lot worse. So now, what could we do to prevent that? Well, we know now more. So just knowing what was different about me that night, well, what was different was I was angry. I was frustrated. I wasn't paying attention. I might have been a little bit tired because I just came off a trip. The point of the matter is that now I'm starting to get a better understanding of how to fix the problem. It's not as easy as simply saying, well, we're just going to go out and increase the fines. Because, believe me, punishment didn't even cross my mind. The thought that I would even have an accident didn't even cross my mind. I mean, go figure. Jim Reason said, sometimes we even have to look higher. Sometimes it's not at the individual level, it's higher in the system at the supervisory or organizational level. Because think about this, as a supervisor, do you believe supervisors can set you up for failure? Absolutely they can. I would submit to you my wife is my supervisor, ergo, there you have part of the problem. But no, I'm just kidding, of course. The truth of the matter is that, yeah, let's say I'm the commanding officer of a squadron of fighter pilots. And I send 2 guys, 2 knuckleheads, 2 people who can barely fly their way out of a box, on a mission, at night, in the weather, low level, 100, 200 feet off the ground, to put bombs on who knows what, and they don't come back. Is anybody surprised? No, they were knuckleheads. They could barely fly anyways. But wait a minute. I had 2 other pilots that were perfectly successful. They had done this before. They'd flown that mission before. They knew exactly how to do it. They were experienced. They had all the talent in the world. Why did I choose those two people that I knew probably couldn't be as successful rather than these two over here? That's the sort of thing we're talking about. Because as supervisors, it's our job to provide people the opportunity to succeed. We have to provide people the opportunity to do well. And if we don't match up people correctly, if we put the wrong people on the wrong job, if we don't provide people the expertise they need to succeed, guess what? They don't. And is anybody surprised at the end? Well, Jim would even go a little bit further and say, sometimes we even have to look higher. We have to look at the organizational tier. Sometimes it's the very highest levels of the organization that will set us up for failure. Things like, CEOs, vice presidents, presidents, admirals, generals. These are the people that actually make the big decisions. And they can set you up too, because they make decisions on hiring practices. They make decisions on pay. They make decisions on what operations we're going to do. They make the big decisions. And those can have a tremendous impact downstream. Anybody that's spent any time in industrial organizational psychology understands that, if I make decisions that reduce my workforce, we're going to downsize because of the economy. So I'm going to reduce my workforce. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to keep putting out the product. I still have to put out the product, but now people have to work more for less. We're going to do more with less. We're going to downsize. We're going to optimize. We're going to streamline. Yeah, what that means is you're going to work harder because we're getting rid of some people now, but we still got to get the same job done. And now that has a trickle-down effect, and now I may have no choice as a supervisor but to pair those two knuckleheads together that night to fly that low-level mission. They don't have the appropriate training. They're not qualified, and consequently we have a problem. Is the problem at the pointy end of the spear? Is it the operator? Or is it higher in the system? Is that where the fix should be? So we look at these things. And Jim says, you have to look at outside influences, inputs, things like that, things that would address or impact your performance overall, but you don't have control over. Things like the economy, politics, things like that. We can't control the weather. I can't control the weather. It just exists. I couldn't control the fact that it was at dusk that night that I had my car accident. It just existed. Well, when we look at that and this whole system, we can notice that there are these failures in the so-called holes in the Swiss cheese. And what you find out very quickly is that these holes, these failure points, if we only knew what they were, we could fix them. We could plug them up. And if I could plug them up, I could prevent an accident from happening. Wouldn't that be the coolest thing in the world? Yeah. So if Jim simply wrote the second book, Human Error 2, that told us what the holes in the cheese were, we could prevent it from happening. But you know what? He didn't write the book. He didn't. And as safety officers, it's our job to prevent accidents from happening again. So what are you going to do? Because if I can't plug up the holes, the next thing you know, these things line up just right and we have an accident. And now we're out with a different hat on. Instead of our safety hat on, we've got our accident investigator hat on. And now this is ugly because we got somebody dead or badly injured. Wouldn't it be better if I could tell you what those holes were so you could plug them up? Well, I can. We wrote the book a few years later. It took us about 4 or 5 years. We were sitting on a gold mine of data. We had every accident in the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps since the very first ones. Yeah. And we sat down and we systematically analyzed them and we identified, using that data, the holes in the cheese. Now, we've since replicated this many times across multiple industries. HFACS is used not only in military aviation, but then it kind of grew into civilian aviation. We got into commercial aviation, so now all the airlines were using it. So not only were militaries around the world using HFACS, but now commercial airlines were, and then when commercial airlines brought it on board, the next thing you knew, now all of a sudden mining starts using it, petrochemical starts using it, medicine starts using it, even Disney was using it. So this system, this model that we had put together based on Jim's original ideas had kind of blossomed into this animal that, although it's modified a little bit for each of the different organizations, generally is the same fundamental principles that I'm about to show you. And so what I want to do is walk you through first, in this first module, the unsafe acts of operators. And by the way, I'll acknowledge that on the left here in the picture is Kavitha Arm. She is a an engineer at GE Energy up in Greenville, and next to her is Katie Berry, one of my doctoral students who's going to get her degree here very shortly in 2010, and she did quite a bit of work with GE, and that's the top of a wind turbine. Those big wind turbines you see, they're at the top of a wind turbine with someone taking a picture of them, so it's pretty cool. Beautiful picture, so you can see the wind turbines in the back. So there you go. So now you know who you're going to be seeing the rest of the time here, but what I want to do, back to the real point of this, is I want to talk about errors and violations. And when we go in and we look at the unsafe acts of operators, you can generally break them down into two overall classes. You've got this class of honest mistakes or errors that you and I make every day. We're constantly making errors. And then we have this other group we call violations, the willful disregard for the rules and regulations. And the key word is willful. I knew what the rules were, and for whatever reason, I elected not to follow them. They didn't matter to me. I didn't need them. Okay? Well, let's take a look at those a little closer. So within errors, those honest mistakes you and I make every day, we really have three types: decision errors, skill-based errors, and perceptual errors. And let's go over each one. So decision errors. The real key point here that I want you to remember about decision errors is these are conscious things. These are things we think about. In fact, I like to refer to them as thinking errors. Okay, so we have this, I'll even go so far as to call these thinking. Let's put thinking errors. So the idea here with these thinking errors is that when we make decisions, they're based on three very important criteria. One is information. Do I have good information? Because if I have good information, I'm more likely to make a reasonable or good decision. Number two, do I have the knowledge to deal with that information? In other words, do I understand what this information really is? I mean, I put you in front of a air traffic control screen and say, okay, I want you to make the decision on how close these planes, if they're on the right vector, and if they're at the right altitudes, and that they're not going to collide with each other. I mean, you're like, I gave you all the great information. It's right there. Every piece of information you need is right there. It's state of the art. But you wouldn't have the ability to make that decision because you don't understand the information. So you have to have knowledge of that. And then the third component is experience. Because with experience comes the ability to make a better decision. But sometimes experience can work against you. Let me just give you some examples here, just to kind of bring it into focus. Let's take, most of us have children at some point. And you're going to find out, for those of you that don't have kids, that children are entertainment. That's why we have kids. Children are pure entertainment for adults. It's for us. And I got to be honest with you, my kids, I have two daughters. My one's 18, the other one's 12 right now, and they're growing up. But when they were younger, they were wonderful. Not that they're not wonderful now, but they were fantastic. They were fun. Because Cindy, my wife, when we had our children, Cindy was a stay-at-home mom, and she taught them everything, and they're wonderful. And at age 4 was about that time when she started letting them dress themselves, which was pure entertainment. Because Cindy could call up to them on a cold winter morning and say, Kim, my eldest, when she was 4, would say, Kim, make sure you dress warmly today. It's going to be snowing outside. Now, that's excellent information, so good information. But a 4-year-old doesn't have any knowledge on how to deal with that information. So the entertainment value was she would come bounding down the steps, and you had no idea what she was going to be wearing. She could be in shorts and a T-shirt. She could be in her bathing suit. She could have on, some sort of princess robe. She could have clothes that don't match. It was pure entertainment. Because while she had good information, she didn't have the knowledge to handle it, nor the experience. But then after a couple years of training and, working with her, now when it was time for first grade, and Cindy would call up to Aaron, or actually Kim, and say, Kim, make sure you dress warmly today. It's going to be snowing. It was never a problem. The fun was gone because she would come bounding down the stairs. She would have on some sort of long pants, a long shirt. She'd have on her snow boots. She would be prepared. So we didn't have to watch her anymore. So for the next several years, we didn't watch her at all. You just called up, you said, Kim, it's going to be raining, it's going to be hot, it's going to be cold, it's going to be snowing, and she came down dressed appropriately. But then, about age 15, you have to start watching her again, right? Because she's dressing for other experiences, and so Mom and Dad are a little more aware. Yeah. Now, that's the same truth that we see in industry. Any industry. When you hire someone new off the street, whether they have experience in that field or not, you watch them, and we watch them real close. They're on kind of a probationary period where we're trying to make sure we're teaching them we're giving them the knowledge to deal with the information that they're going to be receiving so that it's dealt with the way we want them to receive it and deal with it. Because think about it this way. When you go to your new job, those of you that are in this class, probably some of you may already be employed, some of you may be looking for jobs after this. You're going to be very knowledgeable and you're going to have a basic understanding. But when you go to your new job, there's going to be a way they want you to do it. You know, if you're going to work for General Electric, they want you to do it the GE way. If you're going to work for Delta Airlines, they want you to do it the Delta way. And so it's not as easy as just simply saying, you've got the knowledge, go do it. There's a training period, a trial period, if you will. So after about a year, you've now learned how to do it their way and make decisions appropriately based on the information that's being given to you. And you gain a little bit of experience, and life is really good. And so for the next several years, we don't really watch you. But you know what? You're going to find out that, after about 5, 6, 7 years, you start to get complacent. You start to take shortcuts. You do things differently, not quite as standard way. You make non-standard decisions, and as a result, this can lead us to real serious problems. So these are conscious decisions based on 3 important things: information, knowledge, and experience. Well, so those are the thinking errors. So if we have thinking errors, let's just take a look at the next one. We also have doing errors. Doing. So let's call these, I know it's bad English, but let's call these doing errors. All right, so we had thinking, and now we have doing. So these doing errors, these skill-based errors, when you develop a skill, these are things we can do without thinking. I can write my name without thinking. I can talk to you and write my name. So I can say, hey, my name's Scott, and so on and so forth, and blah, blah, blah. I can write and talk at the same time. I can drive a car and talk at the same time because it's a highly practiced skill. When you think about it, when I'm driving down the road, I don't think about pushing on the accelerator, tapping on the brake, the small, tiny corrections I make to the steering wheel. I just do it, right? These are doing it. You don't have to, when I type on a keyboard, I don't have to think about where my fingers go. They just kind of go. Doesn't mean I didn't intend to type. It just means I don't have to think about it. So highly practiced skills like writing your name, like typing on a keyboard, are things we do without thinking. Walking, going, opening doors. You open a door, we all know how to open a door now. But you know what? When you were 1 year old, you had no clue. But over years, you've learned how to open doors. You've developed a skill. I don't have to think about, how do I open this door? Do I pull it? What do I do? No, you just do it. Now, the problem with these skill-based behaviors is you often fall prey to attention failures, memory failures, and technique errors. Let me give you some examples. Attention failure. We've all had this happen. You're driving down the road, you're having a conversation with a friend or a colleague or somebody, or you got the kids in the back, and you got conversation, and you got the radio up, and you're not paying attention, and you go blasting right by your exit. You meant to get off on the exit, but you weren't paying attention. How many of you have walked into an elevator, you'd push the up button, you get in the elevator, it's going down. The door's open, you're just so used to because it's what you do. You walk around, boom, oh shoot, it's going the wrong direction. Well, I guess I'll just ride it through. Or let's go back to the door. You think, opening a door is simple. Everybody opens the door. How many times have you went up to the door and you thought it pushed out or pulled in and you just went the wrong direction? It's like, boom. Oh, geez, sorry. Yeah, it happens. You're just used to the door pushing out, but this one actually pulled in. It happened here at Freeman Hall here at Clemson, where on the weekend they locked the doors, and I'm not used to the doors being locked. And so I was trying to, and normally because I'm a tall guy, I tend to push, you can see my paw print on the front door because I push on the door. I don't push on the handle down here lower. I'm just lazy and I push on the glass. And it was locked. And I'm, got to get out. I'm in a hurry and boom! Thank goodness it's strong glass because I would put my hand right through the glass because it was locked and it wasn't going anywhere. Because the skill I had developed, the doing error I had developed, I didn't have to worry about pushing the bar down there to get the door open, but it was locked that weekend. So we look at that. We look at memory failures. Forgetting items in a checklist. This happens to us all the time. You know, that's part of this issue is that, you know, we work with checklists all the time, and sometimes we forget steps. Yeah. Happens. It's because it's automatized. I mean, have you ever locked yourself out of your car? Yeah. Have you ever locked yourself out of your house? Have you ever forgotten to pack something? Sure you have. Yeah, it happens. It's not criminal. We forget things all the time. But let me ask you this. And this is really an important data point. If somebody forgets a critical item in a checklist, let's say they forget to put we call it lockout, tagout in industry, they forget to put a sign saying that this particular piece of equipment is energized or not energized. In other words, there's power coming to it. Let's say that you forgot to put the sign up saying that it's energized. In other words, kind of a warning. You just forgot. You were supposed to, but you forgot. And now somebody goes up thinking that it's not energized, that it's off, that the fuse has been pulled, and they stick, and they get zapped, and let's say they get killed. What do you think the company's going to do to the individual that was supposed to put that sign up that just simply forgot? If you say probably terminate him, you're probably right. But let me ask you this. Imagine if life were like that every time you forgot something, an item in a checklist, you were treated like you were on the job. So let's say now, instead of forgetting to put that warning sign up that the piece of equipment's energized, now instead you lock yourself out of your house. Well, guess what? How's that tent working out? You'll never live in a home again. Oh, you locked yourself out of your car? You'll never drive again. How's that bike working out? Oh, you say you forgot to pack something. You'll never travel again. The point I'm trying to make here is that you can't punish your way out of these types of errors. You can, if it makes you feel better because you've punished somebody, you've fired them or whatever, go ahead. But that's not going to solve it and prevent it from happening again. It will happen again. I guarantee it. Because it's the manner in which they forgot. It's a type of error committed. It's not an error of volition. It's not intentional. It's not motivational. It's an issue that they simply forgot. It's a normal human behavior. We forget things all the time. All the time. You can't punish your way out. Even if you threaten people with life, if you forget to pick up the milk on the way home, you will be killed. After a period of time, it doesn't matter. You still forget. It has nothing to do with motivation. I didn't intend to forget. So we can talk about that at another time, but the point I'm trying to make here is that the fixes are very different than what you're thinking, or the traditional fix. We talk about technique errors. Simply the way we do things can affect the way we perform. If we start talking about things like, my technique, if I look at everybody, let's take 20 random people, and let's put them in a car. Everybody drives differently. Some drive fast, some drive slow. Some drive real scary, some drive very cautiously. Some people are very aggressive, and some people are very passive. Everybody drives differently. It doesn't mean you don't know how to drive. It doesn't mean you don't have a skill to drive. It's just everybody does it a little bit different. And the case in point, the example I give everybody is northern drivers in the U.S. compared to southern drivers in the U.S. In the north, where we get all the seasons, we get rain, we get snow, we get any kind of weather condition you can think of, we've learned to drive in those conditions. And the way you drive in those conditions is you tend to put distance between your vehicles. So you have distance, a safe driving distance. So if this person stops on the dime, we can slow down. We got plenty of time. It's not so southern drivers can get between us. I met my wife when I was in flight training down in Pensacola. And I will tell you, she drives completely differently than I am. She learned how to drive in the South. And in the South, where it's always sunny and dry and it's beautiful all the time, they don't have to worry about having a safety margin, a distance. Because dry pavement, they got plenty of time to stop. So they tend to drive nose to tail. It's the home of NASCAR and all. So you got these, they drive like race car drivers. They're right on the tail of the guy in front of them. Kind of like they're drafting, kind of like they're saving fuel or something. I don't know. But they drive differently. And I will tell you that, I don't know about southern drivers per se, but I can tell you my wife thinks of the horn as a communication device. I think of the horn as an emergency device. If there's a cat in the road, I honk my horn. A dog in the road, I honk my horn. I don't use it unless it's an emergency. I don't want to run over the cat. But if somebody cuts me off, I don't honk my horn at them. They know what they've just done. It doesn't solve any problems in my view, but I can tell you, my wife and many of the people I know, if someone cuts you off, meh, 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 honk the horn. In fact, if somebody cuts me off and my wife's over here, she'll say, honk at them. What? And I'm like, what? What do you mean? She says, honk at them. They just cut you off. Well, and we get into this discussion for the next 5 minutes, and finally I give him and say, okay, fine. Well, this guy's in the front of me going, what's he beeping at me now for? It's 5 minutes later. He doesn't have a clue but at least I solved the problem. The point I'm trying to make is that everybody's techniques are different. I can take somebody, any of you that have ever driven a rental car, you're used to driving your own car, and you get in the rental car, and guess what happens? You go to turn the lights on, and the wipers start going. You go to turn the wipers on, and the lights start. I mean, how many times have you had that happen? Just because you learned in one environment doesn't mean it translates well to the next. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Techniques you learn in one environment don't necessarily translate well to the next. So we have these technique errors. The way you do things can set you up for failure. So we have thinking errors, doing errors, and the last one I want to talk about under errors is perceptual errors. So we have thinking, doing, and now perceiving errors. And we're talking here about the 5 senses. I'm not talking about, I misunderstood him. No. We're talking about using your 5 senses. Eyes, ears, nose, taste, touch. Right? So vision, auditory, olfactory, taste, and touch. That's what we're talking about here. So when we talk about that, we know that we're not really as good as we think we are at hearing things. Sometimes we mishear things. Sometimes we don't hear anything at all. And our brains tend to fill in the gaps. We tend to guess. How many times have you been told, I told you that? And you say, no, you didn't. Well, maybe they did. You just didn't hear it, or you didn't hear it clearly. Or how about this one? Have you ever looked right at something and not seen it? How could you possibly miss it? We'll learn later in this course about change blindness and how that happens all the time. Or have you ever been driving with somebody that parks by braille? This is the person that doesn't stop till they hit the curb in front of them. Yeah. They pull up and they're getting ready to park, and boom! Oh, we're here! Yeah, because they don't have a good distance. Or have you ever opened your car door into the car next to you? I know what you did. You simply shut the car door, you backed up, you went over 3 spaces so they wouldn't know it was you that hit their car. I do the same thing. But the point I'm trying to make is you didn't mean to hit the car. Or how about this one? You're parked real tight in a shopping center and you turn to your 10-year-old daughter. Kim, be careful with your car door. What's the very next sound you're going to hear? You're right. Boom. Because she didn't mean to do it. But you get angry and you start yelling at her thinking that she did it somehow purposefully. She didn't. She misjudged. It happens all the time. When we're in visually impoverished or auditorily impoverished environments, we don't see as well as we think we do. Have you ever been walking down the steps in the evening? You think you're on the last one, but you got one more to go? Have you ever tripped down the stairs at a movie theater? It happens. Have you ever tripped over a crack or something that you didn't even see on the ground when you're walking down the street? It happens. It's not criminal. The point I'm trying to make is those types of errors have very specific fixes. Just only that, if I go into a company, let's say I go into Disney, pick one, I don't care, and we go in and we say, you know what, your number one type of error, we've looked at all your data for 2 years, and the number one error form we're seeing is decision errors. With just that much information, can we do anything? Absolutely. We can already start to think about the types of interventions to fix thinking errors. And what was that? Well, provide better information. Maybe it's an information issue. Maybe they're not getting the information they need. Well, or maybe it's they don't have the knowledge. So we're going to have to provide them training, and it's classroom type training, where we're going to bring people into a class and we're going to give them the information, the knowledge they need. Or maybe it's simply experience. Now that's something you can only get with time. And maybe it's such a thing that what we're going to have to do is basically make sure we have a more experienced workforce. When we start downsizing workforces, generally speaking, we tend to get rid of the more experienced people because they cost more. So we offer early retirements. And then all of a sudden we're faced with a workforce which had a tremendous reduction in experience, and now all these decision errors start popping up. So you can see how organizational decisions can lead to bad decision errors at the pointing of the spear. Or if I tell you your number one problem is skill-based errors, now what can I do? Well, it may be training again, but it's not classroom training, it's repetitive training. I need to get you practiced up. I need to get you so the skill is evolving. It may also mean I have to look at, are there distractions? Are there things that are affecting their attention? Reduce distractions, those sorts of things. Or maybe it's simply an issue that they're forgetting. Maybe I need to build checklists, put in procedures that force them to do certain things. Whether it's automate things, there's a whole host of things that each of these boxes help me do. If it's perceptual errors, maybe I have to enhance the lighting, come up with a better way to put the sound in. There's a whole host of things and fixes that each of these boxes correspond to. That's critical information. That's human factors. Well, so we have the errors, the so-called honest mistakes, and we talked about the three types, but then we have the flip side of the coin. Now we're not talking about people that are making honest errors, we're talking about the violations of the rules, the willful disregard for the rules and regulations. These are the evil people, right? These are the bad people. Absolutely, we got to throw the book at them. Fire them all. Well, wait a minute. Let's before we go all high and right, let's think about this for a minute. How many of you listening to this video haven't broken a law in the last week? Anybody? Has anybody not broken a rule or a law in the last week? Well, if you're being honest, how many of you have actually driven the speed limit, except en route to a higher speed? I mean, if it says 55 miles an hour on that highway, how fast do you go? Most of us would probably go somewhere between 60 and 64. So we go somewhere between 5 to 9 miles an hour over the speed limit. Why? For three reasons. One, because we know we can get away with it. It's condoned by management. So management condones that activity. Number two, everybody does it. In fact, if you're going 60 in a 55, I guarantee people are passing you. In fact, if you're going 55 in a 55, I guarantee there are drivers that are using their horn, communicating with you, telling you you're not going fast enough. And you're adhering to the speed limit. How many of you hate those guys that drive the exact speed limit? They're annoying. Let's go. Yeah, I'm like you. So not only is it condoned by management, everybody does it, but the third ingredient is it becomes part of your behavior. Yeah. You know, the truth is that you probably always speed. I don't even know you, and I know you always speed. You know how I know that you always speed? Because when the police officers come in the other direction, what's the first thing you do? You take your foot off the accelerator, and you start tapping on the brake. You start slowing down because you know you're a habitual violator. You're evil, right? Well, of course not. You're normal. You're absolutely normal. Let me give you a better example. Kids. I have an 18-year-old and a 12. And when she hit, I want to say about 16, we let her start dating. Let me tell you as a father, that's the most traumatic time of your life. This is not a happy time for a father of a daughter. But the truth is, yeah, it's part of growing up. And so they start dating. And so we would tell Kim, we want you in at 10 o'clock on Friday night. And when Kim got in at 10:15, what are you going to do? If you don't do anything, what time does she get in on Saturday night when you tell her to be in at 10? You're right, she gets in at 10:30. If you don't do anything Saturday night, what time does she get in next Friday? Yeah, it's later yet, 11 o'clock. What we call that is basically normalization of deviance. And if you think about it this way, think about it as, here are your rules. They're a circle. And you've got your child in here, okay? And this is, let's say that's 10 o'clock. That circle represents 10 o'clock. And so your daughter kind of goes on her date, and she comes home, and she goes, and she comes home, and she's always coming in at 10. All of a sudden, one time, boom, she comes, she's out too late, she's at 10:15. She comes in, she's got a perfect excuse. The movie let out later, whatever. And you don't do anything. And then she carries on, and she's still, she's a good kid. She gets in at 10, but then again, all of a sudden, boom, she comes in at 10:15 again. Or maybe it's 10:20, and you still don't do anything. Before you know it, she starts staying out till 10:20, 10:30 regularly. We call this normalization of deviance. I'll just write that down. Normalization of deviance. And what this does is it basically says that that 10 o'clock curfew now went to 10:30. So instead of being 10, we're now at 10:30. Now what happens is, before you know it, eventually she starts exceeding that. And before you know it, it's just gotten larger, and so the rules just keep expanding to a point where it gets out of control. And now, rather than deal with it, when she got in at 10:15, I'm not saying you have to throw the book at her. Basically, I could go, and which is what we did when it happened to Kim. We said, okay, Kim, tomorrow night, your curfew is at 8 o'clock. You're not going to be out till 10. And she'd be, that's not fair. But you know what? It only took one time. And all I did was cut her curfew back 2 hours for a weekend. It wasn't the end of the world. I didn't tell her she would never date again. I didn't get, I mean, it was very, and everything's fine. Since then, she's been fine. If, on the other hand, I'd waited until she came in at 3 or 4 in the morning, and now I do have to go crazy on her, and now you have to do things that you don't want to do. Grounding for life. Sort of thing. Maybe that is a good thing. I don't know. But the point is that this normalization of deviance happens every day. You can see it around you all the time. People that don't wear proper personal protective gear. People that, you know, are going 60, 65 in a 55 or faster. Yeah. It happens. Now, the point is, if you enforce the rules, people will adhere to them. It's a fact. It's normal human behavior. And my daughter is a little human. She will go just as far as her parents will let her go. And we're not overly mean or anything, but we enforce our rules. Otherwise, they don't exist. So we have these so-called routine violations, and those are different than what we're going to call exceptional violations. Here we're not talking about going 65 in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. We're talking about going 120 in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. Let me give you an example. I was a teenager on my way to Wright State for college night. Basically, it was an orientation night, as I was going to be going to Wright State. And my dad said, here, take the keys to the Firebird. Now, that's kind of poor planning on my dad's part, but I did. So I had my 3 buddies and myself. We're going to drive to Wright State in Dayton, Ohio. I live out in the country in Arcanum, Ohio, this farm community. And I'm on a back country road, nice and straight for several miles, with my 3 buddies in my dad's sports car. What do you think I did? Yeah, well, if you probably guessed it. Yeah, I want to see how fast that car will go. I can tell you a 1976 Firebird with that huge engine, that huge V8, will go at least 120 miles an hour. You know, how do I know that? Well, because that's where the speedometer breaks. Yeah, and let me just tell you something. When a speedometer breaks, it doesn't go back to 0. It stays at 120. So you see my dilemma. Being the young junior rocket scientist I was, I knew my dad was going to be furious. So I figured, gee, if I go backwards just as fast as I went forwards, it's going to fix itself. Nothing happens. So my buddies and I were getting tools out. We're trying to figure out, how can we get under the dash and move that back? You can't do it. So at that point, I did what any good Catholic boy will do at that point. I took the car home and I started to make a deal with God. We've all been there, right? Oh, dear God, please, if you answer this one prayer, sure, I'll become a priest, whatever you want. Well, for those of you that have engaged in that kind of behavior, the good Lord doesn't answer every prayer, and there's good reasons for that. And He certainly didn't answer that one. And the next day, I got a phone call from my dad, and it went something like this. Now, remember, this is before cell phone, so I got to go to the principal's office, and I'm thinking, hey, I'm getting an award, you know, whatever. I get up there, and my dad's on the phone. This is how the conversation went. Son, do you have anything to tell me? No, sir. Said, I noticed the speedometers broke on the Firebird this morning. Oh, that. Well, I'm not a good liar. I came clean. My dad asked me a very, very simple question. The same exact question I've asked several U.S. naval aviators as they sat before myself and other senior naval officers in what we call a Field Naval Aviator Evaluation Board. It's a bad boy board. This is where a naval aviator has done something very dumb, broken a very bad rule, and now they're sitting before us, and we have to determine their fate. Are they going to fly again? And I asked them all the same question my dad asked. And the question was very simple. It went like this: son, why did you do it? Now that's a very good question. What was my answer? What was the answer of those naval aviators? What was your answer when you were asked? I said, I don't know. That's a good answer. I don't know. I don't know. To this day, I can't really explain it. Now, that didn't make my dad very happy. It just made him angry. And those admirals that heard that, I don't know, oh, look out. But that's a good answer. I don't know. Now, you could say, well, it was peer pressure. You had those three buddies in the car, right? I don't think so. I'm not buying that. I think I would have done it even if I'd been alone. Well, you know, he's a bad apple. I was a bad kid. Well, had academic scholarships, got in everywhere I want. I mean, I was a good kid. I was a good Catholic boy. I was a good guy. I was the kind of guy I'd let my own daughters go out with. I was a good guy. Well, then, how do we predict this? Frankly, it's almost impossible. If I could predict these, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. I'd be making millions of dollars sucking margaritas on a beach somewhere. The truth is that when I do accident investigation and I go out and I identify one of these in an accident, somebody has an exceptional violation, invariably someone is dead or very seriously injured. And if I could predict that and prevent it, I would make millions. Millions. But I can't. I don't know. We can talk about excessive risk-taking behavior. We can talk about personalities all day long. Believe me, it's almost impossible to predict this. I'd never done it before. I haven't done it since. The fact of the matter was, I had a wild hair. I don't understand why, but it happened. And it's one of the things I fear as a parent all the time, because I know that the best kids will go out and do something really crazy. And unfortunately, when an accident happens, it usually ends up in loss of life. And this is really tragic. So in the industry, if you see this, if somebody busts the rule like that, you have no choice but to throw the book at him, to potentially terminate him. You may have no choice. I had a case where I was dealing with a naval aviator that was a well-decorated, very well-respected aviator who did something very stupid and was now sitting before that field naval aviator evaluation board, and we were determining his fate. And when he came in, he basically came totally clean. He admitted everything, said he was a fool. I don't know what I was thinking. I asked him the same question, why did you do it? I don't know. I wished I could take it back because it was dumb. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done, but I'm telling you, I'll never do it again. And I believe him. I absolutely believe him. Everyone in that room, the admiral, everybody believed him. In fact, I made the argument during our deliberations and said, you know, we need to take this guy, embrace him, put him back in the cockpit, send him around the fleet to tell his story. He will be the poster child for safety. This guy will never break another rule. He'll be the best aviator we've ever had. And no one disagreed. But the admiral very quietly spoke up and said, Doc, I believe everything you just said, but if I don't throw the book at him, what am I telling the fleet? What are you telling people if you let somebody get away with an exceptional violation? You're basically saying it's okay if you're highly decorated, if you're popular, or if you've had a lot of years in the company, so to speak. The truth of the matter is, you have no choice. You have to be just when you use punishment. You have to be the same across the board. And that's the point. So when we look at these things, if I go in and I tell you that I've seen in your company a lot of routine violations, what does that tell you? It says, well, we probably have a problem higher in the system. After all, is the problem the teenage daughter that gets in at 10:30 or 11 or midnight? Or is the problem with the parent who lets them get away with it? It's with the parent. Now, you hold the child accountable, but the reason they're getting in so late and having all the problems is because of the parent. It's supervision and organizational failure that's leading to these routine violations. So when we see a routine violation, you have to go look at enforcement. Are we enforcing the rules? Are we holding people accountable? If it's exceptional violation now, you may have no choice but to terminate the individual. So the point I'm trying to make when we deal with unsafe acts is each of these very discrete boxes have very discrete fixes associated with them. It's absolutely important you understand these. And so I wanted to spend some time. We spent a little more time talking about the unsafe acts than we will about the other tiers. Certainly there's much more to this. There's books written on it. We've written books on it. But I just wanted to give you that background for now. And so with that, I'm going to leave you with this party shot with the unsafe acts. We talked about decision errors, or what we'll call thinking errors. We talked about skill-based errors, or what we're going to call doing errors. We talked about perceptual errors, perceiving errors, and how each of those happen within normal human behavior. Very predictable, and they're honest mistakes we all make. And the fixes are very unique. Then we talked about the violations, the willful. Willful was the key word. Intentional, basically, violations, or the willful disregard for the rules and regulations. And they came in two real generic flavors. Routine, which is condoned by management, organizations and supervisors. They let them get away with it. Everybody does it. And it becomes part of the individual's behavior. They do it all the time. And then we talked about exceptional violations. These were the driving 120 and 55. These are not exceptional by the very fact that they're so egregious, but it's that nobody else does them. It's certainly not condoned, and it's really not part of their behavior. They don't do it all the time. It's just, what were they thinking? So with that, I will leave you, and we'll come back next time, and we'll talk about the preconditions for unsafe acts.